First up is a new series called Chaos, spelled K-A-O-S, which is a tribute to the Greek etymology of the word, because this is a show about the Greek gods. And oh boy, I could not be more excited, because not only is it a show about the Greek gods, it stars Jeff Goldblum as Zeus. And I couldn't ask for a more me show. It's a series that's drawing from Greek mythology, but then interweaving the stories in a pretty creative and clever way. You know, I am such a sucker for Greek mythology. I tried to minor in the classics, being the Greek and Roman classics, in college, although I had to stop when I found out you actually had to take Greek in order to complete the minor, and the schedule for those classes did not align with my film school. So RIP to that minor, but as far as I'm concerned, I had the unofficial minor because I took everything but Greek. So, big fan of this, love a good story, and obviously Greek myths have influenced storytelling through the last however many centuries, and so to do something new with it is pretty impressive. Like I said, Jeff Goldblum stars as Zeus. You've got Janet McTeer as Hera, David Thewlis as Hades, Reiki Aola as Persephone, Cliff Curtis as Poseidon. You've got Naban Rizwan as Dionysus, and then you have a bunch of other characters from Greek mythology. You've got Stephen Delane as Prometheus, Aurora Perrineau as Eurydice. You've got Killian Scott as Orpheus, and then you've got a bunch of other amazing folks peppered in, like Billy Piper has a role in this. Susie Eddie Izzard also has a role. The series comes from Charlie Koval, who is the force behind The End of the Effing World, which I actually have not seen, although I've heard wonderful things about. But if you are a fan of that series, I get the sense that you will be a fan of this. If you're a fan of Greek mythology, I highly encourage you to watch this. You have to be willing to let go to interpretation, because what this does do is weave stories and characters and figures that, you know, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, you will probably know a lot of the stories involved, and then it takes its own take on them, which, again, I love the visuals of how they interpreted this world. So it takes place in a modern-ish Greece. Like, they have cell phones, they have TV, they have all this stuff. But it's also a very fictionalized world because, obviously, gods exist in it. And, oh man, speaking of gods, like, Jeff Goldblum is so good in this. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a huge Jeff Goldblum fan, because I will fully acknowledge there are times where, you know, he'll give a performance, and I don't always blame him. Sometimes it's just the directors want a very specific thing out of him that feels like a caricature of himself, you know, or his public persona or whatever it may be. But this one, he is very dialed in. He is very subtle. He has a great range in it. You know, he gets to express just a variety of emotions, and he does it in a very controlled way, which it was just so fun to see. And again, I fully acknowledge I am the absolute perfect audience for this because I love the folks involved and I love Greek mythology. But the thing about Greek mythology is it has influenced centuries of storytelling because it's really good. So you will probably find something to connect to in this. You have to be willing to kind of let go and not be a stickler for how the stories are interpreted, also because these are myths. If you are familiar with some of the names I rattled off earlier, the character names, like, you're gonna know some of the plot lines involved, or at least like what you'll think you'll know what the plot lines are. And if it doesn't go exactly the way you want it to, like, just be open to it. That's my suggestion. I really enjoyed this. I think even if you aren't familiar and a hardcore Greek mythology nerd like I am, there's still absolutely something to connect to in this, because otherwise it's just basically a soap opera, right? Because that's what, you know, soap operas have drawn from over the past centuries. That's what any sort of storytelling has. A lot of it goes back to Greek mythology. So all the episodes are already streaming on Netflix. I blazed through them. I enjoyed the show. I liked the way it unfurled. Like, it clearly knew what it was doing in terms of pacing and parceling things out, which is always really nice to see, especially on a show that is available to you immediately. Because, you know, I think a lot of the times I struggle with the idea of like, ooh, do I actually want a series to be doled out to me in order for me to process? But this one gives you really good opportunities to take breaks in between. And so, yeah, either way, Chaos is streaming now on Netflix. Highly recommend from me. The other thing I have this week is also on Netflix, and it's called The Deliverance, and it is a film, and as much as I love Chaos, is probably, you know, about how much I just didn't particularly connect to, I will say, The Deliverance. And as much as I am the target audience for something like Chaos, I am probably the opposite level, not the target audience for something like The Deliverance. And I should note that this comes from director Lee Daniels, who did Precious based on the novel Push by Sapphire, who did The Butler, who also did The United States versus Billie Holiday. But based on those other two films alone, you know, if you tell me Lee Daniels is making a film, I will pay attention. However, there's a couple of reasons I'm probably not the intended audience for this. One, I don't like horror films. So, right off the bat, like with no offense to it, not my favorite genre to watch. I also don't have a religious background at all, and if I did, it would be a Jewish background, and this film is very heavily rooted in the church, and so I was just like, I don't know what's happening here, and not that any audience needs to have, or at least for a good film, you shouldn't have to come from a very specific background in order for a film to resonate and make sense. There are plenty of films where it's very helpful and adds that extra layer, but for this one, I was just like, am I supposed to be scared of certain things because, they are things that are scary to Christians? Like, I don't quite know what's happening here. So the premise of it is that a single mother is really struggling. She has 3 kids. She is on the radar of Child Protective Services. She moves into a new place and bad things. Andra Day stars as Ebony, the mother. Her mother is played by Glenn Close, which... one of these things is not like the others in this film, and it's Glenn Close, which, I mean, to her credit, I actually thought Glenn Close was one of the better parts of the film. It also has Caleb McLaughlin from Stranger Things, Demi Singleton, Anjanae Alice Taylor, Monique, Omar Epps, Lawrence Washington, Tasha Smith. So, like, a good cast, obviously, like, well-known director. There's something about this that did not come together for me. Again, I don't know if it's because it was actually way more religious than I thought it was going to be. I should have known based on the name The Deliverance, but I thought it was also going to be more of a balance of, horror and also like the horror of dealing with the system and, maybe racial trauma and all that stuff, which to a degree it is. But then when it's just like, oh, spooky, I was like, oh, okay, the tonal balance of this film was way off. And I was looking back at my notes for this, and I was like, oh, yeah, X amount into this film, like they're introducing this theme. This feels very late in order to do this. And then I thought they were going to tie it together in a different way and be like, this is actually a metaphor for XYZ things. And then no, it was a literal interpretation of some of it. And I went, oh, you have lost me. Again, I am not the audience for this. I don't think hardcore horror fans are even going to be the audience for this because it's not that scary, or it's not scary in the way it's intended to be. I think I don't even know if there's a world in which this could have been turned into some sort of actual political or social commentary successfully. I do think there's a world. I think it would have been a much different film. Also, there are a couple microaggressions in it aimed at, actually not even microaggressions. There are just aggressions aimed at other racial groups, which I don't appreciate, I'm like, can we just not? It's like, it's not necessary and it didn't advance the plot, which really pisses me off when a film does that. Yeah, no, this was not for me. In part, all of that aside, like, it just wasn't a good movie. I'm sorry to say, if you are dead set on seeing this, like, go ahead, but I am trying to equip you at least with the knowledge that, like, from a horror perspective, I don't think it's particularly successful. As a religious story, etc., if it was trying to do something on that front, I don't think it's particularly successful, and then I don't even know what else it's trying to do, and it's not even, like, fun camp at the end of the day, it doesn't even fall into that, like, B-movie horror thing, so yeah, sorry to say, this is only a 2.3 out of 5 for me.